Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture, and another in my series of retrospectives of various superheroes and their foundations. And that means looking at the first year of the character's publication in comic books to figure out what the character was initially all about, because obviously sometimes these characters change over time. And today we're going to be looking at Phantom Lady, created by the Eisner and Iger studio, drawn by Arthur Peddy, appearing first in Police Comics #1. Now, if you've watched my Plastic Man Year 1 retrospective, you're going to see the same covers because they both appeared in Police Comics #1 and went monthly for those 12 months. Now, Phantom Lady is originally a property of Quality Comics. She would later be acquired, along with the rest of Quality Comics stable, by DC Comics, and DC would introduce her more or less into their universe, initially as a member of the Freedom Fighters on another Earth. You know, remember, this is the days of Earth 1 and Earth 2 and Earth S and Earth X and Earth whatever. And that was in Justice League of America #107 in 1973. Now, she would then become part of the All-Star Squadron in 1981, and they'd kind of give the character an origin. She didn't really get an origin initially by Quality, just kind of started fully, realized fighting crime. Well, the character would sort of become known as a bit of a pinup, a lot of good girl art. Dave Stevens did an image of her for their Who's Who publication that kind of rolled through all the different characters at DC. Question is, was she like that from the start? Well, let's roll through and find out. So in Police Comics #1 from August of 1941, we meet the Phantom Lady. And yes, kind of a skimpy costume, but not really skimpier than a lot of the costumes on superheroines at the time. So I think at this point, yeah, there's an aspect of, there's a pinup aspect there, but I don't think it's the whole point exactly behind the character. She does have some pretty cool inventions. Now, Sandra Knight, the Phantom Lady, is the daughter of Senator Knight. So this is set in Washington, D.C. generally, and there's usually a government aspect to it. And in this story, she and her father witness an attack on an explosives inventor that they believe leaves him dead. She decides to investigate. Now, we don't, like I said, really get an origin of the Phantom Lady in this story, but we do find out a few things about her as they lay out the character. Sandra is athletic, and Sandra is an inventor. And what does she invent? She invents a thing called the black light. And we're not talking about something to, show off your cool posters from the 60s and maybe early 70s. This is a ray that blocks out light. So it casts people into darkness so they can't see what they're doing. And that kind of gives her an edge when she's fighting crime. Well, in this story, like I said, she goes investigating and she ultimately tracks down the people responsible. They want to steal this guy's invention. And in the process of this, she discovers that inventor was not actually dead. He was captured by them. So she frees him and the bad guys are defeated. And it's not a real complex story. Again, we're in the golden age. These stories are fairly short. They're written more or less for children, so you don't expect them to be real complicated, but this is a pretty straightforward one. I think, though, it mostly introduces the character of Sandra Knight and what she's capable of doing. And apparently it was good enough that we'd get another adventure of the Phantom Lady in Police Comics #2 from September of 1941. Well, this second adventure involves a potential war between the United States and the nation of Herma, which we kind of will figure out is maybe a stand-in for Japan. Now, what sparks all of this? Well, there's this mysterious fire at the Hermes embassy that they blame on the United States, and of course, they want satisfaction. Well, Sandra finds out about this from her boyfriend, Don Borden, of the State Department, and she suspects that foul play is involved. because there's really no reason for a war between the U.S. and Herma. Okay, so maybe it's not exactly a stand-in for Japan because, like I said, the winds of war were blowing at this point in that direction. She also, though, doesn't think that the ambassador was killed in the fire. She thinks this is all a setup to provoke something. So she decides to investigate. And part of that investigation, she decides she's going to use her father's collection of netsukes, which are these little statues, in this scheme. Well, she takes the statues. And by the way, you notice that Sandra does not wear a disguise as the Phantom Lady. I mean, her face is visible. Nobody seems to know. It's just one of those things. But she is observed doing this by the houseboy, who is Hermes. Yes, the Japanese houseboy was kind of a thing at that time in terms of, having servants and this and that. Well, this houseboy is actually a spy. So he sees what she's up to, obviously informs the bad guys. Well, Sandra goes to an antique shop to sell these statues. When she does, some thugs arrive, but she gives them the black light to stop them from attacking her. But unfortunately, they still make off with the statues. Well, the antique dealer knows where they've gone. They've gone to the Kioland embassy. Kioland is a large Eastern empire with a dictator. Herma is one of the nations ruled by Kioland. Okay, and if you know the old World of Greyhawk setting, this one's spelled Kioland. So it's no relation to the Kioland that was in Greyhawk. Anyways, she finds the statues there along with the Kioland ambassador and a hooded man, and she's nabbed while the hooded man manages to escape. But she gets away. She follows. There's a car chase that ends at the docks, and a seaplane that's waiting for the hooded man. She uses her blacklight to cause the hooded man to fall through a rotten section of the dock. And it turns out that he is a court-martialed Navy man named Todd. I think maybe that's his last name. Anyways, she leaves him trapped in the dock, puts on his cloak, and gets in the seaplane, and it takes her to a shack on Cape Hatteras. And there she discovers the missing ambassador of Herma, who was supposedly killed, and that was the whole cause for a war, provoking a war with the United States. Well, he doesn't want to go back, but she knocks him out and carries him back to avert the war. So this one, not a bad story, a little more complex. We get some intrigue, we get some espionage, and I think we also get to see Sandra in action. She's no shrinking violet. She's in there, kicking a little butt. Now, they don't make her one of those characters who can just, like we get nowadays, that can just defeat everybody around her with all sorts of crazy martial arts. But she does a pretty good job, and she clearly is fearless. All right. Police Comics number 3 from October of 1941. And the theme in this one kind of solidifies that it is Phantom Lady versus the enemies of America. So even though she doesn't wear like a patriotic costume, very much a patriotic hero along the lines of Captain America, Wonder Woman, and several others back in the day. Well, in this issue, she and Don Borden are confronted in the park at night, and Sandra is knocked out by a clout on the back of the head. Don tries fighting back, but he's also knocked out when his head hits a rock. Now, when Sandra awakens, she sees a car rushing off. The thugs dropped a ring of keys, so she has a clue. And you notice that Don Borden is going to be a little bit like her Steve Trevor, so he's kind of put into the victim role oftentimes so that she could be in the hero role. Well, Phantom Lady soon gets on the job. While rushing across town, she picks up a police escort. They're chasing her because she's speeding. Women drivers, what can you do? Well, after she loses the police, she heads for a peninsula on the Chesapeake Bay. She's long suspected a nest of spies was working here. She's right. I love this bit here where she vaults a wall and runs into guard dogs and takes care of them with the black light. So the black light, again, is her major weapon for fighting crime. She gets into this, building, finds Dawn and gets him out with the help again of the blacklight. But what's she going to do without it? Well, she gets knocked out, that's what, but not for long. And picking up her light, she manages with Dawn's help to finish off the spies. So again, this is a very, very simple story. You know, one clue, chase, get there, over the wall, you know, disable people with the blacklight, get Dawn, get away. And that is the weak spot of Phantom Lady early on. Sometimes the art's pretty good, but sometimes it's a little bit weak. But the stories, for the most part, are not super impressive. And they don't have, like, you know, the Captain America stories weren't always real complex either. But they always had that great action along with the Kirby art to go with them. This one didn't. And it may be one of the reasons that Phantom Lady didn't ultimately catch on until, well, we'll see at the end why she kind of got a second breath of life. Police Comics number 4, 1941. Like I said, so far, Phantom Lady has been, you know, okay. But we haven't gotten a ton of personality from the character. But here, she actually gets the anchor position in this issue of the comic book. And maybe means they're going to be developing the character a little bit more. Well, Sandra Knight, while lunching one day in Washington, D.C., happens to meet the Anglian ambassador. So kind of weird. We can't just use English. We use Anglian ambassador. And notes that he's being watched by unwholesome-looking agents. Egad. On the way home, those men, on her mind, she comes across a naval officer who has been shot and left in a ditch, apparently by the men that she earlier observed. She spots their car and follows them to their hideout in the woods, where she discovers that they are Nazi spies. And ultimately, she is captured. Now you go, okay, the female character is being captured all the time. Yes, male characters got captured all the time too. It gave them an opportunity to show their ingenuity and get away, which she does without having to be constantly helped by a male character. So don't get too upset about the fact that she often does get captured, and Batman and Robin did all the time too. It's just part of how the stories and the heroic stuff. And you see, again, some of the art is pretty decent, you know, and some of it gets a little bit rough. Well, they leave her locked in a closet, but she manages to pick the lock with a hairpin. This is something they like to do a lot with female characters, is show that, you know, being a woman was not a weakness in this kind of stuff. It was actually a strength. And that strength was often in the nature of them having something like hairpins on them, or, you know, face powder and stuff like that. I know a lot of people, again, would be like, oh, that's so stereotypical of women. It really wasn't meant to be. I think it was meant to say, hey, you know, guys, women have some special, you know, abilities of their own that we don't have, and we should respect them. So she manages to get out of the closet. Well, by this time, she knows that the bad guys have planted a time bomb on this airship, and she's got to do something about it. Now they have an airplane. She uses the blacklight to get control of the airplane, takes off to try to warn the people on the blimp, which, by the way, also is carrying her boyfriend, Dawn, and the Anglian ambassador. So, unfortunately, they don't get the message of her flying around. So she puts the plane on robot pilot, as they put it. I guess we'd say autopilot nowadays. And she jumps onto the blimp. It's a really nice sequence here. I like that a lot. Well, ultimately, on the blimp, she and Dawn overpower the captain, drop the time bomb on an anti-aircraft battery that tried to finish the job of taking out the blimp, and they save the ambassador. The art here looks like it is improving, and so is the storytelling a little bit, and we're firmly establishing that she is going to mainly be taking on spies in Washington, D.C., issue by issue. Police Comics, number 5, December of 1941. Yeah, big month. We know what's going to happen December 7th in this month. Now, of course, oftentimes the cover date is actually, the book would have been out 2 or 3 months earlier, so it probably wasn't December when this book was actually out. But notice also, by the way, Plastic Man has now elevated himself to the cover of Police Comics. His comic was really, really taking off. Okay. Well, we open this one learning that all of Washington, D.C. is thrilling to the news of the Phantom Lady, fighter for freedom. So she's becoming famous, which you would think would be a problem because she doesn't wear a mask. Just let that one go, folks. Just let that one go. Well, in this issue, she and her father, Senator Knight, are hosting 3 Army officers and an ambassador, another ambassador, from the South American nation of Parador. Parador, you say? Yeah, I'm probably the only one who remembers that this movie exists. And if I hadn't worked at a video store back in the day, I probably wouldn't remember it either. Well, when Dawn and the ambassador's daughter are out night clubbing, he gets a call. One of the Parador Army men is working for the Axis. He has to go investigate. But we know, as with Steve Trevor, that his girlfriend is going to have to do most of the work. The culprit in all this is Captain Ortega. Now he's out with Sandra, so she's apparently in danger too. When Ortega wants to go visit the Navy Yard, she gets a little bit suspicious of the guy. It's kind of a weird place to go on a date. So changing into costume, she boards the USS Atlanta to investigate and runs into the man Ortega claimed he was there to meet. Now, naturally, his story was not true. By the way, if you doubt Sandra's courage, she walked onto a U.S. Navy vessel dressed like that. That is dangerous, dangerous stuff. Now, here, the sailors think Phantom Lady is the spy, even though we just heard that Washington, D.C. is thrilling to her being a fighter for freedom. Maybe they just got to port and they haven't, read the news yet. But at any rate, they attempt to catch her. Well, maybe they were actually just attempting to catch her. She escapes with her blacklight and spots Ortega on a plane. He tries to hit Phantom Lady with the plane. Not very nice. She uses the blacklight, though, and he drives off the deck. Well, Ortega survives that fall, climbs back up on deck, only to discover that the Phantom Lady knows Jiujitsu. The enemy spy is captured. Again, not a lot of twists and turns in this story. It's pretty straightforward. But we do learn here she knows Jiujitsu. Now, this was big. We get it like with Honey West and stuff as well, because some of these martial arts were designed to help a smaller opponent defeat a larger opponent. And that made it a key aspect of a lot of superheroines who were, if they didn't have superpowers like Wonder Woman, generally were going to be outmatched, just in size by the evil men she was fighting. So Jiu-Jitsu, judo, things like that helped to sort of, even the odds for her and help her win. So we get that in a lot of superheroes or superheroines, again, from the 40s, well into the 60s and 70s. Police Comics number 6 from January of 1942. When Sandra and her father stop by Dawn's apartment to help him crack a code, they find him all tied up. And I mean, literally all tied up. A fight ensues, which gives Sandra a chance to slip away so she can return as the Phantom Lady. They do some nice action stuff with Phantom Lady here, in jiu-jitsu, climbing the wall, etc. So she is definitely an action character. Maybe not as action-packed as a Captain America issue from back in the day, but definitely not just, a character who kind of stands back and lets guys do all the fighting. Well, when she gets back to Dawn's apartment, the spies are gone. They drop a flask of mustard gas to cover their escape. That's pretty nasty, which they are able to make from the roof in an Autogyro. Autogyro is very cool. We get a lot of those in the Golden Age. Remember the Bat plane really initially is the Bat Autogyro. But the Autogyro tangles Phantom Lady up in a rope. She pulls herself up and conks the pilot on the head with her blacklight. So not just useful as a ray, you can also just thump people with it, which makes a lot of sense. Now in control of the Autogyro, she loops back around to help her father and Dawn against the remaining spies. In the end, the good guys win, and the two dopes still don't realize that Phantom Lady and Sandra are one in the same, even though it couldn't be more obvious. Police Comics number 7, February of 1942. Well, the Anglican Embassy, remember we had Anglia before. Now we have the Anglican Embassy. Doesn't have nothing to do with the Anglican Church. They're having a masquerade party for the war effort when a man is killed. The man is an Anglican official dressed as a lion tamer for the party. Well, Sandra sneaks off and sees another man in a lion tamer costume sneaking about. She has a hunch. She rushes off to the zoo. Well, at the zoo, a night watchman is knocked unconscious by our pal in the lion tamer costume. Notice the interesting panels here, by the way, used by Peddy in the Phantom Lady stories. Kirby did a lot of that too. You get the circular panels, etc. But when Phantom Lady shows up at the zoo, she accidentally wakes up the lion, which is bad news for our lion tamer, who reaches into the cage after a case and gets badly scratched. He has the cat scratch fever. Sandra helps out by ending the man's pain temporarily by knocking him unconscious. Well, using her blacklight, she gets into the cage, but ends up cornered by the lion. She finds a whip, tames the lion, and retrieves the case. When she approaches the front gates of the zoo, she is set upon by the lion tamer's comrades, but defeats them with use of her blacklight and a good old-fashioned gun. And that wraps up this pretty simple case. The lion tamer outfit was a signal to the hired thugs of where to meet. Not super mysterious. So again, Phantom Lady is not really making it in the story department. Some of them are okay. Some are a little too simple. And I think, again, the bigger problem here is, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, we don't get a lot of personality from Phantom Lady. Like you got, again, with these are kids' stories, but you got a little more personality with Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, etc., Captain America. They don't delve real deeply into that. And these, like I said, these are pretty short stories, so they didn't necessarily have the room to do it. Well, in Police Comics number 8 from March of 1942, we find Phantom Lady down Havana Way investigating suspicious activity by European tourists. Well, trouble finds her quickly as enemy agents attempt to stop her and Dawn from even entering Havana with an explosive thrown at their launch. Sandra dives overboard and hopes that Dawn did as well. She makes it to shore and is attacked by a local with a spear, hopeful of a payoff from Otto. Sandra survives the attack and assumes the guise of Phantom Lady. In a spark of genius, she uses her attacker's donkey to lead her back to his boss's hideout, assuming that the animal would know the way, and he did. So very clever. Phantom Lady uses her blacklight then to disable the guard. Otto pops a shot off at her. I love her response. He'll wish he hadn't shot at me. I'm sure he will. And this part is really great. She spies on the Germans who are planning on conquering Cuba. And a guy then busts in and says, a spy disguised as a rumba dancer is hiding in here. So kind of a funny commentary on her costume. And notice, we got Germans here. We're not playing games. We're fully, at this point, at war with Germany, so we can just make the bad guys into Germans. Well, Sandra gets away with the plans in her rumba dancer costume, but her father gets in contact with the local police chief, who turns out to be working with the spies. Phantom Lady ends up being caught as well, having lost her blacklight, and things are looking pretty bleak. Except Dawn has infiltrated the gang, and he strikes. This allows Dawn and Phantom Lady and her father to all escape. She uses her retrieved blacklight to disable a guard and get the plans out of the barrel where she had hid them. Western civilization is saved again, and it's nice to see Dawn get to do something here kind of useful. The problem, again, is that we don't get much of her life outside of adventuring, so we don't really get much of a personality, and that's what makes these characters really grow on people, makes you feel like you know them. You don't necessarily feel like you know her. And again, Dawn's like the boyfriend, but you don't really see them being boyfriend and girlfriend very much. It's just kind of an excuse to get the story started, usually. Police Comics number 9, May of 1942. The story opens with Sandra taking a walk outside before bed, noticing a Japanese spy peering in the window, watching her father, who's in conference. She changes into her Phantom Lady costume, with her blacklight, follows the spy. Now, it seems the Japanese spies are working with an American traitor. She moves in but doesn't notice a figure creeping up from behind. Phantom Lady is knocked unconscious and locked up. When she comes to, again, she manages to pretty easily free herself. The Axis plan here is to assassinate Sandra's father, Senator Knight, in the U.S. Senate the next day, and it seemingly succeeds. Shocking. Phantom Lady pursues the assassin, a German, and subdues him with the help of her blacklight and some wrestling moves, and it turns out that Senator Knight will actually be okay. He wasn't hit fatally by the gunshot. Again, pretty simple story. Police Comics number 10 from July of 1942. We're still doing wartime Washington, D.C. here, which makes sense, and this one has to do with corruption in the offices of civilian defense. Phantom Lady investigates and catches a Mr. McMaris working late. She tells McMaris she's going to help clear up the matter for him, and as soon as she leaves, he gets on the phone to his cronies to have a meeting. While they're meeting, Sandra's boyfriend, government agent Don, shows up. Now, remember, he was with the State Department before. Now he's a government agent. I don't know if they've kind of tried to make him less just a guy who works for the State Department and more of kind of a spy. Would make sense if they did. Don jumps on the back of their car when they leave. When they arrive, he finds that Phantom Lady has beat him there. The good girl art element of Phantom Lady is becoming a little bit more apparent here. And I think Arthur Peddy's art is definitely showing improvement as we go through these stories. Well, Dawn hears a scream, runs down to the cellar, finds a man has been hanged. Phantom Lady, meanwhile, chases after the other crooks who escape in their car. She trails them to a park and discovers that McMaris is actually behind everything. Dawn manages to overhear the fight between McMaris and Phantom Lady, which involves her tearing off McMaris's face. It's not like not his actual face. They weren't going for gore in this one. Dawn arrives in time to help defeat the German agents, and all is well. We have improved art in this one, but again, pretty simple in the stories and the characterizations. Police Comics number 11, September of 1942. Our next story begins with a murder. A German agent masquerading as a cab driver kills his passenger. It's not really good for business. Sandra and Dawn happen by, and Sandra recognizes the corpse as Lieutenant Bob Forbes of U.S. Intelligence. He's been working on a case of sabotage at a U.S. refueling station. This looks like a job for the Phantom Lady. Very quickly, she's captured by German agents, but she turns her blacklight on them, and in the scuffle, one agent shoots another. The surviving agent flees, and Phantom Lady searches his pal and finds a clue. When she follows up, she is accosted by the spy ring and gets a little chin music. Importantly, though, a watchman hears the scuffle. The spies flee, and when Phantom Lady awakens, she sets a trap for them. She leaves and sends some police to deal with the spies. All right. Again, pretty simple story. We do end, though, this one with Sandra in a bubble bath, listening to a report of her exploits on the radio. So, okay, maybe leaning into the, the pinup girl kind of image that we oftentimes got with Phantom Lady. Police Comics, number 12, October of 1942. This time we're tackling women war workers. I don't mean we're actually tackling women war workers. And maybe some lady saboteurs. After witnessing several new American tanks fall apart, Sandra goes undercover and gets a job as a riveter in a factory. She meets Maisie, who thinks it's just wonderful working in a war plant. Well, she sees a man who had been kind of obnoxious earlier, got a slap. She sees him pouring some liquid in a vat. And again, we can see Peddy's art is getting better here. I like that panel with the close-up of her face there. What's going on with that liquid? So that night, when others leave, she sticks around and catches the goon red-handed doing sabotage, but he and his fellows get away. Bet you thought they were going to capture her, huh? Well, no, not this time. On the next day, they are testing the tanks again, but the goons commandeer one of the tanks, intent on destroying the others. Phantom Lady and Maisie end up in the target tank, and this turns into an armored game of chicken, but Phantom Lady has the blacklight advantage and manages to defeat the saboteurs. Get a little more personality here in this one, better art in this one, but again, a very simple story. I don't know that the stories were really drawing kids in. And the truth of the matter is, Phantom Lady was not at this point long for Police Comics. Peddy would continue to draw the strip for one more issue, and then the great Joe Kubert would draw the strip from issues 14 to 16. She gets a face mask here. Somebody figured out that her identity was pretty easy to figure out. And there is some improvement in the art, though this is, again, pretty early in Kubert's career, so it's not like the amazing stuff we're going to see much later on. Frank Borth took over drawing issues 17 to 22. The mask at this point is gone. The art is better and definitely more pin-up-esque. And she's as feisty as ever, growing to meet knee. Randy Palace in number 23 takes over the art. He had a style more influenced by Jack Cole. And honestly, if you look at those old Police comics as they go on, a lot of the art starts to become very influenced by Jack Cole and what he was doing. Well, Phantom Lady would next appear in a crossover with the Spider Widow in Feature Comics number 69 to 71. That is the Raven that they are fighting over. After Quality dropped the character, Iger Studios, who believed they owned it, shopped her out to Fox Feature Syndicate. With Fox, she premiered in Phantom Lady number 13, which was retitled from What a Life Comics. So What a Life became Phantom Lady. And this version, I think, is the one that is best known, as it is drawn by the amazing Matt Baker, who was exceptional at good girl and pinup art. He would do a lot of romance comics later on. Well, in this book, she would get 10 issues. This is the cover to issue 17, which would be reproduced in the infamous Dr. Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent. And he might have had a point here. But you notice, too, the costume becoming skimpier at this point. So they're much more leaning into the sort of pinup good girl aspect of the character. So did she start off that way? Not entirely. And I think that the original Phantom Lady stories, even though they're not complex, she's a really good, heroine. Gets in there and fights, does all sorts of heroic acrobatic stuff, has the invention, etc. Becomes a little bit more, cheesecake as they go on. And again, she would ultimately end up in DC in the 1970s in Justice League of America, number 107. That is Phantom Lady, year one, plus a little bit more so you can get a little more context of the character. As Golden Age heroes go, she had a pretty good run in Police Comics, but didn't become a lasting, well-known character really until she is, revived in the 1970s in Justice League America, where they were reviving a lot of the Golden Age characters that DC had become, had acquired over the years. And she'd kind of roll from there, sometimes in new versions, but always highlighting the sort of pin-up good girl art style that became associated with her, with Matt Baker. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Phantom Lady. Let's put the infamous cover up while we talk about that. Let me know what you think about her in the comments. Favorite character? Is there a version of her you like best? Love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this little retrospective, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. That would be very cool. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.